Hey guys, a few weeks ago, I was in a very hopeless place around different things going on in personal life and just business. Like, just a lot of things were feeling really heavy. And I was kind of stuck, like, not feeling motivated, asking myself these questions of, like, why am I doing any of this? What's the point? Um, and, like, didn't like it. It's not a fun place to be, but it was giving me this sort of callback to how often when I was deep in PMDD and how common that feeling is when you're struggling with this like chronic mental health disorder where and it's not even and I just think there's something different about this chronic cycle. So it's not just like you're in pain all the time or you're depressed all the time necessarily, but you almost get these moments of reprieve and you know how good that feels. And so having this diametric experience almost like heightens that difference for us, right? And so it's very easy to go into hopelessness, especially if we have put a lot of effort into trying some things, into building up that hope that maybe this medication or this tip and trick or lifestyle change is going to make a difference. And so then when it doesn't, it can really send us into this sort of pit of despair. And so as I was experiencing these feelings, a couple things came up that I wanted to share. First off, I think so often when we're in the conversations around PMDD and finding relief, it's really like, how do I shut off the pain? How do I stop it? How do I push through it? How do I just kind of make it go away? And so a lot of solutions are sort of geared toward this sort of like band-aid type thing where it's just like, let's just mask it, let's cover it up, let's avoid where that pain is coming from. And I think all of those tools in terms of like, going on birth control or antidepressants or lifestyle changes or things that are kind of providing any element of relief has its place and can create some space for you in the process to actually deal with deeper things. But I wanted to kind of highlight this because when I say that I am living PMDD free, I think it's so important that I define that as like, this isn't a circumstance of like, okay, and I never have negative feelings anymore and I never have to deal with any ups and downs. And that really isn't the goal. The goal with PMDD free is that I can have hard things happen. I can feel hopeless. I can feel some really intense negative emotions. And I also have the tools and awareness and am able to move through that different and actually move through it versus getting stuck there and have it be something that is this that in that process of moving through it, I've built self-trust. I can now trust myself more, rely on myself more. I now know that I'm capable of moving through that as opposed to almost like this cycle of re-traumatizing each month because we feel these feelings and we disassociate, and then the fear around those feelings and the fear around our inability to cope and handle those increases. But what I want us to think about when it comes to these super intense negative feelings that stop us in our tracks, right? So maybe we have months where it's not great, but we were able to cope with life a little bit better. And then we have months where it feels like nothing's working. And I want us to consider that pain has a purpose. When we think about physical pain, I think that connection is really clear, right? We know that pain gives us really important signals so that we don't put ourselves in mortal danger. And what I want, oh my gosh, I have a hair in my mouth. Ugh, okay. When we think about emotional distress and emotional pain, I think we often don't see the value and the purpose of what is that protecting us from? What is that bringing to our awareness? What is it asking us to address? And I think especially when that pain becomes chronic, that feeling of hopelessness, that relief may not even be possible, becomes really challenging, right? But if we're trying to answer this question of what is the purpose in this feeling? What is this feeling asking of me? What's it inviting me into? What is it asking me to learn? Because I think so often our lessons come not through when everything is great, but they come through difficult moments. And I think there's often this kind of perspective of like, oh, this is trying to teach you a lesson. And I don't like that perspective, because I don't think that PMDD is out to get you, or PMDD is something that's attacking you. PMDD is an expression of a need. Okay, so there is this part of PMDD that's part of you that's saying like, I need to get louder and louder because my needs are not being met, because I don't feel safe, and I need to partner with you to do something about that. Right? But how do we even go about answering these questions when we feel so horrible, when we feel like we can't get out of bed, or we feel like we want to just find any escape from it? And the idea of being productive, or the idea of even facing the feelings or feeling the feelings, is like your body is going into so much resistance, because that feels unsafe, that feels dangerous to your brain and your nervous system and your body. And so I think so often when we're in these hopeless feelings, what we try to do is we try to be productive, right? That's what we want to do. We want to be able to do all the things on our to-do list, and our body's like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. And so we think that like, if we could just get ourselves to do something and be productive, we could kind of break ourselves out of this loop. And we're so fixated on being productive that we miss a lot of the invitation and the lesson that's there. So I want us to have a different perspective and think about the antidote to hopelessness is not productivity. It's not checking something off of your to-do list, but the antidote is play. It's play, it's pleasure, it's presence. So some really basic ways that you can start to do this that don't require you to actually do anything different, because we have to think about when we're in these dysregulated states, because hopelessness is very close to that like shutdown, that freeze state where the body is just burnt out and like, I'm not participating, I'm not doing anything, right? And so how do we start to bring in some presence and some activation without flooding that system further? And so one way is being mindful, being present. So if we think about the ways that our go-to ways to disassociate. So let's think about like eating. Let's say you're binge eating. If you can even catch yourself in that moment of eating and pause and notice how good that cookie tastes, how good those chips taste, how much dopamine and serotonin those things are shooting through to your body. So savoring it, feeling it in your mouth. What about it is so good? Is it the texture? Is it the combination of sweet and salty? Like, what about that feels so good? Or if you're thinking about, maybe you tend to disassociate with like TV, books, entertainment, like getting lost in another world. Like, what if you caught yourself or allowed those Netflix prompts that are like, oh, are you still watching? Like, allow that to be a prompt of mindfulness to notice, like, what is it that you enjoy so much about this? Do you love getting lost in the story? Do you enjoy the drama? Like, you just like love it? Or are you finding so much comfort in these like familiar favorite characters that you go back to? Like, what is it about those characters that draws you in? What are the things about them that you wished you embodied, or that, you resonate with? And it's coming back to the body and saying, what about this is so comforting? If you're maybe not even doing any of those things and you're just like laid out in bed under your blanket, like hiding away from the world, taking a moment to pause and notice, like, how good does that bed feel right now? How good does maybe a weighted blanket and that pressure feel? How good does your favorite blanket, like the feeling, the softness of it, how good does that feel? And as you allow yourself to be present and feel like those good things, also giving ourselves permission to feel the bad things too. To say, I'm feeling hopeless, to name that. I feel hopeless. I feel unmotivated because I'm disappointed that this effort that I put out to feeling better hasn't worked. I feel angry that nothing seems to work. I feel angry that I continue to fall back here. Okay, acknowledge it. All of those feelings are coming from a real place. But then once we can start to play around with being in our body, playing around with letting these feelings be heard, we can then look towards, now how do I start to shift and create more lightness in this experience? So one of my favorite ways to do that, once I've gotten a little bit more activation in my system, or it can be a first thing depending on, what's accessible to you in the moment. There's not really like a necessarily a right order. It's just really working with your body of like, what will you do in this moment? And often I need to get into my body first before I can take the next step of like using resources that I have. But my favorite one to use is EFT. And I can send a link to my go-to EFT videos, like YouTube videos, when I don't have the energy or capacity to script it out for myself and I just need to be held. I also can link, I've created an EFT like more specific to PMDD, but that is a practice that is incredibly helpful at lifting the heaviness, because we have to navigate this, again, this activation system of how do we start to build on that activation so that we can move into and actually feel and experience more pleasure, more play, which then restores us to a place of like wanting to do things that make us feel good and are rewarding, including productive things like knocking things off the to-do list. But I think too, once we're able to lift that, the final step in this process is once we create some space, we can then kind of reflect more on what is this experience telling me? What is it asking me to feel, acknowledge? What's it asking me to reevaluate? What is it inviting me into? So I think back to my experience a few weeks ago where I was just feeling like so hopeless. And I was like, where is this coming from? Why is this coming from? And initially I was like, this is just annoying. Like, why am I facing this? But then when I came back to like, okay, what is this trying to tell me? I found that there were areas in my life where the reason I was doing things was dependent on external validation. I was relying on other people's response to me and their sort of value they were placing on things as the why for doing something. So when that wasn't present in the way that I wanted and the timeline that I wanted, I was like, why am I even doing this? And so it brought me to this moment of reflecting and saying, okay, what is at the core of why I'm showing up in this relationship, why I'm showing up in different ways in my life, and really served a really powerful purpose for me personally. And then when I look back at the times that I was so stuck in PMDD and feeling these hopeless feelings, so often the root cause there, the thing that was asking to be acknowledged and to be held, was that my expectation for myself was so far away from that current moment, right? The only thing that was acceptable was this idealized, hyper-productive version of myself. And so I wasn't in relationship to the body that was needing rest and support in that moment, right? I was not fully accepting myself, fully approving of myself in those moments. And based on how wide the gap was between that current self and this idealized self, which was the only version that was acceptable at the time, I was stuck in this pit of hopelessness of like, I don't see how I bridge this gap. I don't see how that happens. And if that can't happen, what does that say about me? That means that I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. And again, this just sends you further into that freeze state. So looking at what this pain has to share with you, what it's asking of you, what it's giving you an opportunity to see that maybe you're not wanting to see or willing to see in moments that you're feeling good, or maybe it doesn't feel like an issue because you feel good, is so important. And the way that we get there and the way that we start to bring activation in our body and increase that capacity to, one, feel those things and to be present in our body, is through play and through pleasure and through allowing ourselves to feel that wherever we can find that spark of hope and expand it in our body. And if you're going through a season of hopelessness, or you're finding yourself falling into this pit of hopelessness month after month as PMDD flares, I want you to see where you can give yourself permission to just feel that, to feel the disappointment, to feel the anger, to let those feelings move through you, and to find even a small way to bring some mindfulness and nourishment to your body, where you're partnering with your body and it becomes safe to feel negative things, but it also becomes safe to feel good things. I hope this is helpful. And as always, send me your follow-up questions, send me the resistance, send me the things of like, okay, well, that's nice, but it won't work for me because XYZ. Like, I love getting those types of questions from you guys because that helps me to refine things. It helps me to go deeper with you. And it really draws out the more specifics of how I have started to shift these patterns in my own life and make this content even more helpful for you.